Hello and welcome. My name is Peggy Sundstrom, and I'm the lead faculty member for the PhD program in Organizational Development and Leadership. I'm the host of this session, which is entitled ePortfolios, Connecting Coursework and Career Competencies. This presentation is the third of 4 presentations in a series called Course Design with Career in Mind. Later today, starting at noon Pacific time, I'll be hosting a panel presentation with the presenters from all 4 individual presentations. So I hope you'll join us for that. For our audience members, your microphones are muted for this presentation, but I encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, keep your eye on the chat for a link to a session feedback survey. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Barbara Hall from Northcentral University. The title of Dr. Hall's presentation, ePortfolios, Connecting Coursework and Career Competencies. Dr. Hall, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Peggy. It's a pleasure to be a part of this series. Sarah and Matthew touched a bit on ePortfolios, and so I'm going to pick up the baton from there and dig into them a little bit more. As Peggy said, I currently work at Northcentral University as the Director of Curriculum and an Associate Professor. I previously worked at Ashford University for quite a while, so part-time from about 2009 to 2012, and then full-time from 2012 to 2017. So it's great to be back here and see some of my old colleagues. So I do want to start engaging you in the chat just to learn a little bit more about you. So whatever you feel like sharing about yourself and your role, sort of your ideas about what the purpose of a portfolio is, you can choose any of these questions and pop them into the chat if you'd like. When did you last use an ePortfolio as a teaching tool or perhaps a learning one for yourself? Maybe you used one in an interview. Where do you want to use portfolios that maybe you haven't yet? And why'd you choose the session? So if you feel like it, choose any of those questions and pop them into the chat, and we'll see if we can get you guys talking on the side. I welcome side conversations even if I can't see them, so go for it. Quick objectives for our session. So we're going to talk about value, scaffolding, tutorials, tasks, and the industry competencies and standards. So let's get to it. So I'm framing what I'm sharing today around what the problem is. And I think that one of the problems, especially in using portfolios to connect career and course and competencies, is that portfolios often lack proper scaffolding. Again, Sarah and Matthew touched on that, and I'm going to take a deep dive in there as well. I think that portfolios are often used more for assessment than they are as their broader potential as a learning tool. They're often disconnected from competencies, or they can be limited to only programmatic learning outcomes, maybe institutional learning outcomes, but we don't often dig into those industry outcomes. So we're defining a portfolio very broadly for this session. So I've highlighted a few key words. So they are learner-centric, not the institution. They're populated by the learner, not the examiner or instructor. They are, sorry about that. They're primarily concerned with learning and not assessment, as I said on the previous screen. They are meant to encourage lifelong and life-wide learning, if you're familiar with that concept, so not necessarily in any one narrow lane, rather than a single episode. One of the things is that we so often plop a portfolio in at the end of a degree program, maybe in the last course, and we're like, okay, now develop a portfolio about everything you've learned and done and feel and dispositions through the whole program, and that's not an effective way. This also allows learners to present multiple stories of their learning and not an aggregation in the approach that I'm talking about students actually have the opportunity to go back and revisit previous artifacts, which are the things that they upload into their portfolios, so that they can reflect on those, reflect on the learning that's occurred since the first or second iteration was done. And then this one's particularly interesting in higher education. So a portfolio is controlled by the learner who invites feedback. Even if we're using our institutional portfolio tools, I think I heard Sarah mention Portfolium, and in this particular approach that we took to a Master of Science in Instructional Design program, we used the Brightspace D2L portfolio tool that was already built in there. We also have advanced graduate degrees in instructional design, but actually a portfolio isn't required for those. We stuck with the practice-focused masters. All right, so the 4 considerations I'm going to review today are scaffolding, tutorials, course integration, and student engagement. And most of the time I'll spend on the scaffolding because I think that is one of the key piece, just a little bit more than the other 3. So let's get started. If you're not familiar with scaffolding, think of it as the frame of a house. So this is how we build new information on what students or learners already have familiarity with. It is incremental, so scaffolding is meant to change. If you're around education or familiar with Vygotsky, it's the zone of proximal development. So you're really looking for that spot where they can do it with some assistance. They can't do it completely on their own, but they can do it with some assistance. It's very reflective of authentic practice. So for scaffolding an ePortfolio in a program to prepare students to demonstrate those career or industry competencies, we have to really think about how you scaffold individual activities within a course, how you scaffold the courses throughout the programs, right? So we're scaffolding activities, we're scaffolding within a course, right? Starting with maybe there's lower level CLOs and working up to the higher level CLOs in an individual course, and then stacking those courses in a similar fashion sort of to the very end of the program. So that, again, if you're looking at programmatic learning outcomes, you might be starting with those lower ones and building to the higher ones. And that's also what enables you to have reflective activities where you can consider what career competencies you have demonstrated or improved from the first or second iteration of something you did in a previous course to an end of a course. So I'm just going to hop over this just a little bit. So what we're talking about here is the fact that scaffolding can be described as hard or soft, and micro or macro. So for an ePortfolio, the scaffolding is hard, meaning it's static, it's planned in advance as part of the course design. You can scaffold while you facilitate a course, but the sense that I'm talking about here is in advance. It's more fixed. It's something you can't change once the course is started. And then macro, meaning it occurs at the structural level within the broader curriculum. So again, we're making sure that we're focusing on that programmatic level. And that also is one of the ways that it helps you to ensure you're demonstrating that growth in career competencies that I mentioned earlier at the activities, the courses, and the program. So we conducted a task analysis, sort of getting at both the process of developing the portfolio across a program, as well as the eventual product that they have at the end of their time. This was very helpful in particular in terms of career competencies and industry standards, because along the program, students sometimes adjust their career goals based on what they've learned about the field and being a practitioner in the field. And so that was another useful way to help students think about which particular competencies or standards they wanted to focus on. I do want to pause real quick and clarify that this is not a competency-based degree program. I know I'm using, talking about career competencies, but this is not competency-based in the truest sense of the word. So what we ended up with is a sequence of 12 courses where the individual portfolio tasks were embedded in the courses, starting all the way back from getting sort of student buy-in and understanding the value of an ePortfolio for career development. So we really started with just saying, well, why is this really important? And then we worked on, this is before they've ever uploaded a single artifact into their portfolio. They work on the technical aspects of it. So Portfolium or the D2L LMS portfolio feature, just learning how to get in there and do stuff with it. And that's because that reduces that cognitive load in their understanding and frustration later when they're both trying to finish an artifact to share and trying to figure out the darn system. So we start again, no portfolio related tasks, then sort of the value of a portfolio, how to use the tool, and then we start building on more of the competency and standard specific artifacts that we want them to get to. So content specific tasks related to the portfolio didn't even start until course 5 of the 12 courses. And then you can see here the different ways we highlighted which task would be in which course. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the value of the students and how we got them to buy in. I want to move on now to talking about the tutorials. Specifically around the tutorials, we had to build them ourselves because of constraints across the university, but we wanted to make sure that both students and the faculty instructors had sort of some chunked information about how to use the tools. So everything from logging in, uploading artifacts, creating collections, which in the D2L tool is how you can have individual artifacts, but you can also group them together, and then creating a presentation of the collections and artifacts. So creating collections was particularly important because this is how you start choosing your themes, and that was one of the tasks that was listed in the chart, how you look at your themes. So a tendency is for people to think of the way they curate the artifacts in terms of maybe a course. Okay, this is what I produced in ID 5000. But a better way to think of it, and collections change as you go through the program, is around those career competencies. So maybe I am going to be interested in doing something that focuses more on multimodal development than sort of a pure instructional design, for example. So you might want to create collections on multimodal interactions, or like if you're using software. So Matthew mentioned Articulate. So if you want to show what you can do in Articulate and Canva, whichever other tools might be out there. So those are the tools that we created. And as I mentioned before, this helps students to avoid, and frankly instructors too, when they have to help the students, to avoid those technological problems that get really frustrating for them. They're more willing and able to focus on the alignment with the career competencies. Like I said, to avoid cognitive load, so they can focus on the more content-related pieces of acquiring the knowledge, developing the skills, and the dispositions that are required. All right, so scaffolding, tutorials, moving on to course integration. So the way in which students are first introduced to the overall portfolio is what I described before. And recognize that, again, the first 2 courses have no portfolio related tasks because this is a master's level program, and we want to make sure that students are focusing first on what it takes to be in a master's level graduate program, how to learn at the graduate level. The different tasks are assigned in each course, and that scaffolds the knowledge again within an activity, within a course, and within a program. This also helps to identify which courses would be most appropriate for which portfolio-related tasks, and particularly the career competencies. So then part of the course integration was that we had to come up with how to integrate the portfolio task within the course, especially if there wasn't a clear alignment, but that's where the scaffolding said this piece of knowledge needs to go. And then writing the assignment instructions in such a way that it supported student learning. So we also had to add the relevant tutorials in the relevant places. And again, we wanted to chunk everything throughout. We created faculty teaching guides for the faculty to help them integrate the portfolio activity into a single course. That was particularly important not only to get faculty buy-in and support for what is sometimes in a course can be a challenge to clearly link the portfolio tasks or assignments with the rest of the course. And that did happen in a few courses. And then also to integrate other career-related resources as necessary. So we aligned the entire set of ID programs, both graduate and advanced graduate, to the AECT standards, to ATD, Association for Talent Development, ISTE, and IBSTIPI. And I'm happy to explain what all of those crazy acronyms are, if you want me to. All right, so some other constraints that we experienced in integrating the portfolio tasks in were, or that you may want to consider yourself, are the actual tool that you're using and how you choose that tool, the information technology resources that it requires, because you're definitely going to see more service tickets in the beginning than once some of the things have been smoothed out and students are in courses 6 and 7 and don't have as many questions. And then what policies and procedures the institution or the particular school has in using the portfolio. And again, especially if you want to align them to standards that are proprietary, for example, like IBSTIPI, then you have to work at an institutional level to buy a license to use those, versus if you want to just align them to some standards that are in published materials that you can reference. Another helpful note is to identify a single point of contact as the portfolio resources owner. Otherwise, there's going to be problems with versioning. You need somebody who's going to be the one to say, and this, when I say somebody, I also mean maybe perhaps a department. So is it going to be your Center for Teaching and Learning, or HR that may do internal training? Is it going to be IT? Is it going to be the school itself that keeps up with the changes when to the tutorials and the instructions when the platform changes, when the LMS platform changes, any revisions you might make based on user feedback, any changes in academic requirements, and then of course, what if the competencies themselves change somewhat? Then what are you gonna do? So it really has to be a collaboration between the academics, the administration, and the tech folks to make sure that everybody is doing their piece when you need to revise. And then finally, just a couple of other things we threw in for fun as we integrated the digital portfolio in courses with that career-specific perspective. We added some introductory resources that sort of said, what is a portfolio? We introduced those because they learned that they're going to do a portfolio from the very beginning of the program, even though they don't start any portfolio-related tasks until the 3rd course. So again, we're easing them into this, giving them a sense of confidence before they even start, and that was to start that buy-in process. we decided to include a glossary of terms because after a certain point, you become so familiar with what a collection is, for example, that you forget that a newbie is not going to follow your thinking there. And then we continue to look for opportunities to describe the long-term benefits to instructors and students alike, retaining the lessons learned because they've related them to industry standards, recalling their past achievements, integrating that feedback and making a product better because of it, and then as a ways, especially towards the end of the program, to illustrate the career competency, to have a literal thing that can say, I can do this, I'm proficient at this, because I have this thing here that I can show you, and then I have evidence to describe how I learned to do it and how I did it. So I mentioned the chunking. All that I want to say here is that we made sure and chunked the tutorials, for example, and the instructions that we gave them into how to access, create those collections, add an artifact, and then share the collections, so that students were more likely sometimes to even just to see the name of the tutorial and then remember what it was that they wanted to do. Because everything was chunked, it's easier to recall. Finally, student engagement. A lot of it because of the scaffolding and course integration that we've done, the student engagement piece, we could have some fun with that and thinking about that before the program launched, and then once we started to get feedback. So we talked about those multimodal artifacts, the models on designing and integrating portfolios, so the whole experience for them was a way for them to learn how to do it in their future work. So they experienced it, and now they can design it in their future opportunities. It helps them to make those connections between ideas. I've mentioned some of the other challenges about integrating tasks into the flow of a course, getting buy-in from students and faculty, and focusing on the alignment of the portfolio with programmatic, institutional, well, course, programmatic, institutional learning objectives, and of course those career standards. So those are the 4 considerations or pieces to consider: scaffolding, tutorials, course integration, and student engagement. This approach has won a couple of awards. First, specific to North Central, Innovation and Teaching Award, and then this year the Best Practice Award, 2nd place, but we'll take it, for the AECT Division of Distance Learning. Again, I'm Barbara Hall. That's my contact information, and my colleague in crime for this approach is Miranda Regnance, a good friend and curriculum project manager. She's Barb's brain and keeps me sane. So thank you so much for the opportunity to dump all that on you quickly.
Barb, thank you very much. It was very, very impressive. Lots of great information there. I learned more than I had known about considerations around using a portfolio. I want to ask people to post questions in the chat, but I scribbled one down here for my own. I understand that the portfolio is used across a program, but are there some courses that it seems to fit better into? And if so, can you talk about that slightly? Because I would think some places it might be kind of like a forced fit as opposed to that's natural, just fits into the flow of the course.
You're absolutely right, Peggy. So in some courses, for example, in the 7th course of the sequence, they are working with authoring tools. And so it's an easy fit to look at an artifact that you created in another course and then create something multimodal from that, right? So maybe you had something that textual and you wanted to create something. It's a fit, it works there. But then there are other times, especially in the earliest parts of the program, for example, course 3 is talking about, I think it's learner analysis, and the portfolio related task is sort of like what is a portfolio and why is it important? So it doesn't quite fit. So one learning thing was to make sure that you have course learning outcomes that reflect the importance of a portfolio related task there, because then you can align it to a CLO and up through a PLO in that sense. So that was definitely helpful. And sometimes it was just a bit of a jarring sort of thing, and that's just the way it had to be. Again, we told students from the beginning, this is what we're going to do, this is why we're doing it, and this is how it will work in the end, even if in the beginning it's a little sticky around the edges.
Right. So students have responded well to this. I mean, they know coming in they're going to do this, but did you hear grumbling, or did you hear, wow, this is really cool?
Oh no, you're definitely grumbling at the first, right? Because grumbling from students and instructors too, because it's something different and change is hard, even good change. I think a lot for the students and some instructors too was not fear, anxiety around understanding the process, feeling, well, will I do anything creative enough? What if it's not good? What if I'm not successful? I think is probably the question a lot of students are asking themselves at the beginning, whether or not the portfolio is a requirement of it. So they are told, we try to, again, ease them into it. But then after they start working on it, they love it. They love sharing it. Some instructors have started creating their own portfolios. Again, it's very authentic to practice of instructional design to have a portfolio. So that's one of the reasons we chose that program to start with, because there were so many clear industry standards that we could align to.
Great. So it becomes certainly your award suggests that it's become an integrated part of the program, and therefore the students and the instructors come to see it as really a value. How can I say this? It's an outcome above and beyond their learning that's a reflection of their journey in some ways.
Absolutely, and they feel ready to go, because so many job requirements in instructional design require a portfolio. And so they're happy at the end that they have this wonderful thing, and something that they can remix for multiple purposes, because remember, you can create a collection and a presentation in different ways. So you can have artifacts in multiple themes or collections. So one might just be to showcase yourself. One might be this specific job over here you want to apply for.